Thank you, Deputy Speaker. People should have the right to control their own income. People should also have the right to safe, secure and affordable housing. And people should also have the right not to live in poverty. Because this bill contravenes those rights, the Greens will not be supporting it. This bill is an extension of income management and removes the rights of public housing tenants to manage their own income. It also poses risks to residents as a result of lost income and the stress this will put on their health and the health of their families. If people want to enter into income management voluntarily of their own free will, then there is a role of government to facilitate that. And the Australian Greens do believe that a form of voluntary income management may be useful for some people in managing their finances, but it will not be effective unless people enter into it at their own free will, and the processes involved are transparent and clear. Instead, Labor wants to force people to live below the poverty line by removing their ability to negotiate how much of their rent arrears they can pay according to their means. The Australian Greens would rather see $8.6 million spent on initiatives that add to the safety net, not cut more of it away, and increase services that empower people, not spent on taking their power away and making pressure worse. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Greens recognise that income management is not evidence-based social policy for a caring society, but merely a pursuit of a new approach to a social welfare based on paternalism. The government has consistently emphasised the importance of evidence-based policy. For example, Minister Macklin has spoken of her unshakable belief in the power of responsive, evidence-based policy to drive progressive reform at many different levels. Yet the growing body of evidence on various forms of income management demonstrates that it does not work. From the last 4 years' worth of income quarantining in the Northern Territory, research clearly demonstrates that this policy isn't working. For people affected by child protection income management in WA, WACOS have noted very low rates of participation in financial counselling for people affected, and financial counsellors found child protection income management makes recipients more dependent than before, stifling their motivation to develop financial management skills. So if income management does not reduce exits to homelessness and does not improve personal decision-making, goal-setting or financial literacy, and only enforces dependency on the system, what is it good for? And if indeed income management is the only way we can prevent these exits to homelessness, what does this say of the way we are running our public housing system? What does it say about our safety nets? And, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not even clear that there's a problem. The most recent Productivity Commission report on government services states that there is a very high rent collection rate in public housing of 99.6%. The main reason that the government has provided for this bill, though, is that it will reduce the risk of homelessness from tenants facing eviction due to arrears. But this is a very long bow, and the long bow the government has drawn in tying this bill to the goal of reducing homelessness is insulting to those who work in the sector and could think of a lot better ways to spend $8.6 million to reduce homelessness. And that's something I'll speak on in a moment. But this bill was discussed during the recent Senate estimates hearings. The lack of information that FACSIA could provide on key elements of this bill at this late stage was astounding. What they could tell us was that 756 public housing tenants were evicted due to arrears in 2011-12. Another 1,111 tenants have abandoned properties leaving arrears, excluding Tasmania, and that is across the whole of the country. But when asked how many of those would have gone into homelessness, they didn't have figures. When asked what evidence they have that enactment of the scheme will reduce homelessness, the answer was completely inadequate. When asked for figures of tenants evicted by jurisdiction, and when asked for dollar figures for the arrears, they didn't have the figures. The states want a mechanism to make it easier for them to take away tenants' income, yet refuse to provide figures on what tenants owe. And this federal Labor government is aiding and abetting Conservative state governments to increase the pressure on public housing tenants. And isn't the mere fact that they are saying that this measure is due to preventing public homelessness of concern? If people are becoming homeless from arrears, then this is an abject failure of the state's duty to care to protect the most vulnerable. Is the safety net so bad that people fall straight through it without any support at all? And when asked why the ceiling is 35% of a tenant's income, which of course would automatically place all payees into housing stress, they had no satisfactory answer, except to say that it's an upper limit and that it will be up to state housing authorities to decide on a case-by-case basis. The very same state governments that we hear day after day in this place are cutting services and are not treating people with the respect that they deserve. And when asked if putting people into housing stress also puts people at risk of homelessness, the department had no answer. All in all, there is no hard data to support the claim that this bill will prevent homelessness, and it has been really uncomfortable to watch the government try. But it's not just the Australian Greens who oppose this bill. Deputy Speaker, many housing peak bodies and community sector organisations were involved in the consultation process. And across the board, fairly unanimous opposition from this bill has been articulated by Homelessness Australia, ACOS, National Shelter, the New South Wales Tenants Union and the Top End Women's Legal Service. National Shelter does not support the legislation and has concerns about whether the scheme will really alleviate homelessness. Homelessness Australia does not support it. They have not seen any evidence that it would reduce exits into homelessness. The Northern Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency and Central Australian Aboriginal Legal Service both put in submissions in opposition to the bill. What's concerning is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. The consultation was not public, but just with these select representatives. But closer to my home, the Public Housing Tenants Union of Victoria also opposed the bill. They believe that the problem of evictions due to non-payment of rent, which the bill allegedly targets, does not even exist. They say Faxia did not obtain adequate data on public housing evictions due to rental arrears from the states, a point that was proven in Senate estimates on Monday night. They say public housing residents cannot get evicted by the Housing Office in Victoria without an order from VCAT, the Victorian Civil Administrative Tribunal. And regardless, the majority of public housing evictions do not occur due to rent arrears. Therefore, they say, there is no need for this bill, certainly in Victoria. What is clear, though, is that this bill hands the Housing Office a shortcut to residents' Centrelink income support payments to minimise the costs associated with managing arrears. Tenants Union of Victoria's submission highlights the following risks to residents. This bill will increase poverty. It is proposed to be capped at 35% income management of Centrelink payments, and this would leave a single parent with one child approximately $24 a day to live on. The bill does not include an independent appeals process. The bill undermines already existing successful processes. And in Victoria, the current system of residents negotiating payment plans with the Housing Office is working. Tenants are currently able to negotiate individual payment plans, but this bill will eliminate that process. And the bill will increase demand for other support organisations. The government says that it's addressed the needs of the sector, but the sector says this is not so. Deputy Speaker, this bill is particularly close to my heart as the member for Melbourne. There are 8 public housing estates in Melbourne, the most concentrated in any electorate in Australia. And I'm extremely proud of the work I've been doing with public housing tenants in Melbourne over the last 3 years, and that I've been lucky enough to represent them in this place. I've attended community meetings and gatherings and am in close contact with tenants and community groups. I've attended the Hands Off Melbourne's Estates rally, where public housing tenants spoke out against sell-offs and private developments in Fitzroy and Richmond. My office has assisted hundreds of residents in public housing to access suitable housing and services, particularly around maintenance issues, and has also assisted people facing homelessness to get into public housing. This bill provides a good opportunity to tell the Parliament about the issues public housing residents really care about. And what I'm hearing is that people are doing it tough and living in overcrowded conditions in public housing because they are waiting for years for housing that is often not big enough for their families. Their incomes are so low that they're finding it hard to make money stretch and having to choose between essentials, food or school materials. Labor's cuts to single parents means single parents can't afford rent and can't make ends meet. They are also concerned about the low level of Newstart, which wasn't increased in this budget, and the cuts and changes to disability support pensions that Labor has brought about. They really want dental care to be in Medicare, something the Greens have fought for and won for kids, and they want to see more funding going to public schools. They want to get a job, but often can't find appropriate services for finding a job. They want a suitable place for their kids to study and do their homework, but are worried about overcrowding and what it's doing to their family's health. More recently, there's been a move by the Victorian State Liberal government to make changes to public housing. And people are concerned that this will mean rent rises, and worse, that public housing will be privatised and that their housing is being sold off from under their feet. And yet, in Melbourne, between 2006 and 2011, total number of dwellings owned by a state housing authority actually decreased from 7,291 to 7,172, and this in the face of public housing waiting lists tens of thousands long. Deputy Speaker, the Greens believe that all people should have the right to control their own income. People who haven't been able to pay their rent for just 1 month can be forced under this bill onto the scheme and then kept on it for a full 12 months, even after they've paid off their debt. I'm deeply worried that public housing residents will be at a greater risk of poverty and will lose control over their finances by being forced onto this scheme. People don't fall behind because they can't be bothered paying their rent. Rental arrears suggests people are in deep financial trouble. We know that lower income support payments lead to people having to resort to credit, loans or borrowing from friends. We also know that people are going without essentials, like savings for an emergency, contents insurance, heating and cooling and so on, that further compound their housing stress. Money is incredibly tight for them and the pressure is only getting worse. Income managing people in such difficult financial situations will only compound problems and push them further into poverty. This policy will hit some of the most vulnerable people in our community. The recent Salvation Army National Economic and Social Impact Survey found that 37% of people on the disability payment, 36% of single parents on Newstart and 29% of single parenting payment recipients are in public housing. There must be a more caring way to help people out. This bill comes at a high cost and there are better alternatives. The costs of managing this scheme are so high it is impossible to justify it. The cost of this mechanism is $8.6 million over 4 years, and that is astounding. The Greens believe this money would be far better invested in providing services and caring for our most vulnerable. The Greens and welfare organisations around the country are calling on the government to fund more services instead of attacking public housing residents. Instead of this bill, the government should be looking at the root cause of arrears and evictions. The Australian Greens know that the causes for homelessness are many and complex, which is why we're so disappointed at the lack of any new action taken by Labor in this budget to increase services or funding for new housing for people experiencing homelessness. The government should be providing more support to programs that are proven to work. If we were genuine about reducing the risk of homelessness, we would provide more funding to voluntary schemes such as Centre Care, which already exist, where public housing tenants can nominate to have their rent automatically deducted. Their arrears could be similarly deducted through a voluntary payment plan. We'd provide more funding for agencies to support to people at risk of arrears and evictions, fund more case management and support worker programs for residents, fund training for housing officers, increasing housing officers to support people, and fund the Victorian Social Housing Advocacy and Support Program, for which the Liberal state government recently cut funding to their frontline services, putting over 2,000 people, including individuals, families and children, at risk of homelessness this year. It's also worth pointing out that for $8.6 million, we could provide 16,000 tenants with safety and security measures like security screens on their windows and doors and swipe cards in their buildings. Or we could put a solar panel on the roof and insulation in the homes of almost 3,000 public housing tenants, which would dramatically reduce their cost of living and improve their comfort. Or we could take 24 families off the public housing waiting list by building that many new homes outright. To conclude, the Australian Greens believe all people should have the right to control their own income. The Greens stand with the peak housing bodies and welfare organisations around the country who are calling on the government to fund more services instead of making the lives of the most vulnerable in public housing even harder. We need to protect all people and their families from falling into a poverty trap. We will oppose this bill.